let us learn another chemical property of metals, and that is what happens when metals react with water. For that, we need to perform an activity for which we will require samples of the metals. We will take samples of the metals which we have taken for previous activity. The samples you can take as aluminium, copper, iron, lead, magnesium, zinc and sodium. What do we have to do? We have to put small pieces of the samples separately in beakers half filled with cold water. We need to make use of a pair of tongs to pick the metal pieces, and we have to put it into the beakers which are half filled with cold water. So we will take one by one the samples and we will observe what actually happens. We will observe that metals react with water, and after reaction they produce a metal oxide and hydrogen gas. Metal oxides that are soluble in water dissolve in it to further form metal hydroxide. But all metals do not react with water, remember. Refer the first two chemical reactions. Metal plus water gives metal oxide plus hydrogen. This is common reaction for metal and water. When metal reacts with water, it forms metal oxide and hydrogen gas. Now further what happens? The metal oxides which are produced from metal and water, that metal oxide will react with water and it forms metal hydroxide. So these two are general common equations which you need to remember. Very easy. First, metal reacts with water and forms metal oxide and hydrogen. That metal oxide reacts with water and further it forms metal hydroxide. Let us take examples and learn it. Metals like potassium and sodium react violently with cold water. In the case of sodium and potassium, the reaction is so violent. Violent means it is so strong and exothermic. What is the meaning of exothermic? We have already studied this in chapter number 1. Exothermic reaction is the reaction in which heat is released during the reaction. So, here in the case of potassium and sodium, the reaction is so violent, so strong and exothermic. It produces heat also. And because of this, the evolved hydrogen gas immediately catches fire. Okay, so see this, what happens when the sodium and potassium are kept in cold water. Their reaction is so strong that they produce heat also. That is why the hydrogen gas, which is produced during the reaction of metal and water, that hydrogen gas immediately catches fire. Here are the reactions of potassium and sodium with water. Let us see it. Potassium K plus water H2O forms 2KOH, that is potassium hydroxide, plus H2, that is hydrogen gas and heat energy. Similarly, 2Na, that is sodium, plus 2H2O, which is water, gives us 2NaOH, that is sodium hydroxide, plus hydrogen gas and heat energy is released. Now, if we take calcium, then what happens? The reaction of calcium with water is less violent, it is less strong. So, what happens? The heat which is evolved, that is not sufficient for the hydrogen gas to catch fire. If it is so strong reaction, then only hydrogen gas catches fire. Here, in the case of calcium, it is less strong, so the heat which is produced, that is not sufficient for hydrogen gas to catch fire. The chemical reaction for that is calcium Ca plus water 2H2O gives us calcium hydroxide CaOH2 and hydrogen gas. Now calcium starts floating. Why? Because the bubbles of hydrogen gas formed stick to the surface of the metal. Okay, the hydrogen gas which is formed in the reaction of metal and water, that is calcium and water. So that hydrogen gas is sticking to the surface of the metal, the bubbles of hydrogen gas, and that is why calcium starts floating. Let us take example of magnesium. Magnesium does not react with cold water, but magnesium reacts with hot water to form magnesium hydroxide and hydrogen. Remember, magnesium does not react with cold water, it reacts with hot water. And when it reacts with hot water, it forms magnesium hydroxide and hydrogen. It also starts floating due to the bubbles of hydrogen gas sticking to its surface. Again, same like calcium. The hydrogen gas which is produced during the reaction of magnesium and hot water. The bubbles of hydrogen gas will start sticking to magnesium metal, and that is why magnesium will start floating. Metals like aluminium, iron, and zinc do not react either with cold or hot water. This is need to be kept in mind. Magnesium reacts with hot water. Calcium reacts with cold water. But these metals, aluminium, iron, zinc, they do not react with cold water also and with hot water also. But they react with steam to form metal oxide and hydrogen. Steam which is generated by the reactions of metals and water. Metals such as lead, copper, silver, and gold do not react with water at all. So, this is all about what happens when metals react with water.